When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
Welcome to the Modern Taoist with Kit Mann. Ancient wisdom, modern life, and the way. Join the free Modern Taoist community on Patreon at patreon.com/themodern Taoist or visit the website at taoananda.com. And now, the Modern Taoist.
Well, hello and welcome to another episode of The Modern Taoist. My name is Kit Mann, and it is another release of another episode on another beautiful Tuesday. A little chilly here in Oregon last couple of weeks. But I'll be honest with you. Weather is my biggest Taoist challenge. It always has been. Complaining about the weather is silly, isn't it? Talk about things we can't control. But it has always been my biggest challenge to stay on track is complaining about the weather. Thank you, by the way, for all the great questions and comments, for your participation over on the Patreon page, which is free. It's patreon.com/themoderntaoist. Also, thank you to a few people who have already come aboard for some private guidance sessions. Those are available to you on the website at daoananda.org. It's DAOANANDA.org or .com. And it's right there. It's easy to find. And I thank those of you that are participating so far. There is room for more if you guys are interested in getting a little private one-on-one time. Today, I want to talk about an episode. I want to talk about in this episode some things that have come about sort of because of the private sessions. And that is, we've done an episode in the past called, I think it was called Stop Owning Your Negatives. And it might be one you might want to refer to after this one if you don't recall. But I said to someone in one of our private sessions, and I won't say who because this person has the right to privacy, obviously, and the right to keep things to themselves. But one of the things that I have always said, and I said it to them, and I've said it many times, is people will ask me, how do you handle these big catastrophic events? How do you remain so calm? And I have always had the thought process that I would, when the world is on fire, I try to be the rain. Some seasons of life show up gradually, right? Slow accumulation of small changes. You look up one day and realize things are different from how they were. These are manageable. These are adjustable. These are things that happen, gradually. You adjust, you find your footing. A transition has a pace that you can match. And if it doesn't, at least the ground beneath you stays roughly where you left it. You just kind of shift. But then there are other things. There are times when everything does go wrong at once. When the relationship that was already strained finally breaks, when a job disappears or becomes untenable. And it just happens to be at the same time when your money gets tight, or a family member who was struggling suddenly tips into crisis and causes upheaval, or a friendship you thought was solid turns out to be hollow in ways that you didn't expect, or a health thing that you were hoping would resolve doesn't resolve. And underneath all of this, a version of yourself that you had relied on, frankly. The one who handled things, the one who kept it together, the one who knows what to do. That version starts to feel less available. Like someone that you used to know. You know what I mean? Like something you used to be able to reach has now moved without your permission. And these are the things people mean when they say that their life is collapsing or their life is on fire. Not one thing going bad, but everything going bad. Or enough things at once that the distinction between what's good and what's on fire and what's not is pretty small. The individual fires have merged into something that no longer has an old strategy that you can apply to it. Sometimes you can't handle this one, then this one, then this one. That stops working because there's no longer a sequence to follow. There's just heat from all directions all the time. And the question that arrives in the middle of all that really is, what are you supposed to do with yourself when you're living inside that inferno? What does steadiness look like? What does it even mean to cope when the original way of coping is not accessible? People try the obvious things first because they're the ones that we've prepared for. Fight harder, tighten your grip, take control of the parts of your life that still feel controllable. Or the opposite happens. People just collapse. They stop resisting because resistance is too exhausting and it hasn't been working anyway. And they just lay back and let the fire, take what it takes while they sort of nap in the middle of it. Neither of those are what Taoism suggests. What it suggests is something that sounds almost too simple and considerably more difficult when you actually try to live it. Something that requires a kind of a courage that doesn't look like or feel like courage, but it is. And that is to simply, or rather not simply, be the rain. When life goes into chaos, real chaos, not inconvenience, not a tough week, something specific happens to a person because most people are so busy managing the chaos, they never stop to notice what it is doing to them. And what it does is it narrows. It narrows you. Your attention starts contracting around the problem. Everything that isn't the crisis recedes into the background. Friendships that existed in the undisturbed life, interests and pleasures and small rituals, these things don't exist anymore. You haven't abandoned them. They just feel unreachable because the fire is using all the oxygen. And in that narrowing, something else happens that is a bit harder to notice because it happens from the inside. You begin to match the energy of the situation. The fire makes you hot. The urgency makes you urgent. The chaos makes you chaotic. The register of a life under extreme pressure becomes the register in which you operate all the time, even in the moments when the crisis doesn't actively demand it. This is a natural human response to sustained pressure. The nervous system is doing exactly what it is built to do, right? The problem is not that the system is doing this. The problem is what happens when it does this for weeks or months at a time. For a fire season that keeps extending past the point where you thought it should have ended by now. The nervous system in that state begins to produce damage that has nothing to do with the original fire. Right? Decisions made from inside that alarm state tend to be faster, harder, and more final than they need to be. A conversation with a partner that could have been navigated carefully becomes confrontation because the patience has already been spent. A professional situation that needed a measured response gets a reactive response because the measured option went away. The person who needed gentleness from you today received a depleted version of you. Not because you don't care, but because the fire has been running the account down for so long that gentleness isn't accessible. Right? The person in the middle of a burning life is not just managing circumstances. They are managing, believe it or not, an identity crisis. Because the version of themselves that existed before the fire, the competent version, the one that had held things reasonably together, the one, whose life made a certain kind of sense, that person is obviously no longer present. That person they're not disappeared, but they are absent. And then a story shows up about what this means and what it says. And that story, running underneath all this chaos, is usually worse than the fire itself. And this is where Taoism comes in. Lao Tzu doesn't spend a whole lot of time in the Tao Te Ching talking about how to solve practical problems. This is where a lot of people get confused about the Tao Te Ching. They read it and they go, yeah, that didn't tell me how to fix anything. He doesn't really do that. What he does is he spends a great deal of time talking about the internal orientation from which a person meets a problem. The difference between force and flow, between response that comes from resistance and response that comes from alignment. Between a person who enters a burning season and becomes the fire and a person who enters the same season and somehow is the rain. He's not describing someone who's untouched by the fire. He's not describing a person floating above ordinary human suffering with a smile on their face. That's not what he's saying. He's describing someone who understands, usually through experience, sometimes costly experience, that matching the energy of a difficult situation does not resolve it. It feeds it. It is the oxygen the fire needs. The thing most needed in a burning life is not someone that can match the fire. It is someone cooler. Someone that doesn't combust. Someone that can be something that the fire has not yet encountered. And now we get to go back to, say it with me, everyone, water. Lao Tzu wasn't especially fond of rivers. I want to get that clear. It's because water illustrates something about nature, right? We've brought that up many times. Chapter 78 makes the case directly. Nothing in the world is as soft as water, and nothing is better at overcoming the hard and the strong. The soft overcomes the hard, the gentle overcomes the rigid. Everyone knows this, and no one applies it. That's what Lao Tzu says. The last line is the one that hits you, right? Everybody knows this, and nobody applies it. Not because people are dumb, but because the culture of surviving gets reinforced by by every piece of advice offered by people who love you and want to help. It looks like stone and not water. Harden up, hold firm, don't let it break you, show them you can take it. It's always about resilience and resistance. It's built from a vocabulary of hardness. The hardness is framed as the thing between you and collapse. But Lao Tzu's observation is precise. And in that precision, it is uncomfortable. The hardest thing as a Taoist teacher is when someone is looking you directly in the eye or saying something to you in an email and you can tell that they just want you to fix it. It's heartbreaking sometimes, and it's also very frustrating on my end that I can't. Because given enough pressure, enough time, enough sustained force, it is the thing that refuses to yield that shatters. And trying to explain to someone to forget the labels of hardness that they've been taught their whole life is hard for them to hear. It makes them uncomfortable. I can tell you that the willow survives the storm that breaks the oak. I've told you that many times. But that doesn't solve the problem. Because Taoism understands that problems occur. And we're not going to be able to solve many of them. Many of them, most of them, have to resolve on their own. And it is how we decide to absorb that uncomfortableness. That is what will decide how we get out of this. Rain, the word firefighters has always been an interesting way to describe someone that puts out a fire, because water does not fight the fire. It does not arrive arguing about why the fire is wrong. It does not have a strategy for defeating the fire on fire's terms. It simply falls. It simply comes down. Water is water. And the fire then responds to what the rain is doing rather than what the rain is intending to do. Intention, most of the time, is irrelevant. What matters is the nature of what arrives. And that quality, being what you actually are, at your own temperature, without being converted into something else by the heat around you, is what Taoism is looking for. We translate this as a virtue. That's close, but not quite right. Day, T-E, day, is closer to inherent nature. The particular quality of a thing when it is fully and genuinely itself, without distortion, without performance, and without adaptation. The day of the river is what makes it move. The day of the tree is what makes it grow the way it grows. And the day of you is the deepest quality of who you actually are, not the version shaped by other people's expectations or the version that is formed by the defense against pain. And what a life on fire tends to do is erode that essence. The sustained pressure of chaotic circumstances begins to produce a version of a person which is shaped more than chaos than by who they actually are. They become reactive where they were once considered. They become closed where they were once open. They become suspicious where they once extended trust. And they often don't even notice that this is happening. That's understandable. But it also costs you more than the fire itself, because the hardness that develops in response to a burning season or a burning situation, that hardness does not go away when the season is over. When you get through it and you come out the other side, that hardness still exists if you allow it to build up, because it becomes structural. Right? The fire eventually goes out, but the person who spent so much time inside it is changed. We've talked about this before. Changed in ways that you did not choose. Right? So the question that Taoism asks in a burning season is not how to become harder. It's asking, where is your root? What is the thing that is genuinely you? The quality, the value, something the fire has not yet reached and that you could choose to protect, not by defending it, but by returning to it again and again as the ground from which everything else is navigated. That root is still there. Even if you can't feel it right now, even if the fire has made it temporarily inaccessible. The practice of being the rain begins with believing in that the root is still there. And then begins again with trying to find it. The place to look for what the fire has done to you is not in the obvious. It's not in the blow up or the breakup or the breakdown or the night where everything comes apart all at once and you find yourself on the floor of the bathroom at 2 a.m. wondering, how the hell did I get here? Those are visible moments. They carry their own clarity. The place to look is in the small daily texture of ordinary interactions. In the moment in those moments that don't seem to warrant examination because they're so small. But notice how you speak to people around you. Not in the heated moments. Those are expected. You're going to speak differently. Everyone who loves you has already made allowances. I'm talking about in ordinary moments. Conversation with someone who has nothing to do with the crisis and is simply trying to tell you something about their day. Or the response to a small request when you're already running at capacity. The quality of your listening when someone needs to be heard. Is there still some of you genuinely available in those moments? Or has the narrowing gone so complete that even undamaged relationships are receiving a version of you that you would not choose to send them if you were actually paying attention? Notice what has happened to your relationship with pleasure, with rest, with the small things that used to constitute a good day. The walk, the book you're reading, the conversation that goes somewhere unexpected. These things tend to disappear when you're affected by the burning season. And that disappearance tends to feel appropriate because, and here's the question. This is the question. How could you possibly enjoy anything when everything else is hard? How often have you put yourself in that position when things get hard and you don't even feel justified to laugh? These things were never luxuries. These were the means by which you remained yourself. Without them, the only input that you're receiving is the fire. And the only output it's producing is the response to the fire. And over time, that distinction between the person and the crisis blurs. Notice what you are telling yourself the fire means, because this is the layer that does the most sustained damage. Because it is running underneath everything else. It presents itself as a story, but not as an obvious truth. And the story might be, and this one we use all the time, about causation, about why this happened, about who is responsible, what decisions led me here. It might be about prognosis. When are things going to get better? How are they going to get better? Whether the version of life that existed before this is retrievable. Are you the kind of person that can recover from things like this? Or the kind of person for whom things like this become permanent? Sometimes the story is about identity, about what this reveals about who you are underneath the version of yourself that the easier years allowed you to access. Whatever form that story takes, it's almost always wrong. It's almost always hotter than the circumstances themselves. The circumstances, believe it or not, are finite. They will not last forever. But the story can. There's a Taoist story about a man who was out on the water when his boat was struck in the night. He was mad. And he lit a lamp and saw that the boat that had drifted into him was empty. I may have told you this story before. No one had steered it into him. No one had been careless or malicious. It was just a boat on the water in the darkness that had gotten loose. And the collision simply was what happened when two things are in the same place at the same time. And his anger dissolved. Why? The situation hadn't changed. The boat still struck him. It was still dark. He was still out on the water. Nothing changed. The only thing that changed was the story of fault and intent. And that was what he was mad at. He's never mad at the situation. He was mad at the intent, the fault. Most people are living inside a collision story when they're having a season that is on fire. Someone steered into you. You steered yourself into this, or the universe is specifically pissed off at you and you alone and specifically arranged this against you, or this is what you deserved, or you should have seen this coming, or this is what happens when people make dumb choices. These are all stories that you're using to try to ascribe fault and intent. These are stories that are almost never accurate, but they're very difficult to examine when you're inside the story, because the fire makes the story feel like perception rather than interpretation. This is why it becomes so difficult to manage while you're in the fire, because the recognition that matters the most is not in a single insight. It's a repeated daily noticing of the gap between what is actually happening and what you are adding to it. Go back and listen to the episode of Not Owning Your Negatives. I'm going to take a pause for 1 second and give you a personal bit of information that I have not brought up at all, but I'm going to give you a personal bit of information. And I give you this information not as an effort to say, look how smart I am, or look that I am superior in some way because I do it this way, but to give you an example of what I'm talking about. 2 weeks ago, I had a small minor accident, and it turned out I broke my leg, fractured my leg. Okay. I did not tell anyone except my wife, of course, and kids, the doctor. But that's it. I didn't call around telling my friends I broke my leg. I didn't call my siblings and family and put it on social media and make a big deal out of it. Why wouldn't I do that? Because me constantly telling everybody about it would simply add more heat to the fire. Right? My constant description of it, the constant retelling of the story, it would keep it burning. The broken leg isn't going anywhere. There's nothing I can do about that. It will heal when it heals. It's not going to last forever. Does it suck in the moment? Yeah, of course it does. But does me using it as my daily identity make it better or worse? It makes it worse. So in this particular instance, I have to become the most aligned version of myself as I can be. Bringing the rain in the fire is not a feeling that you achieve. It's a practice. It is a recurring, daily, frequently screwed up, often imperfect choice to return to your own temperature when the heat around you has been working to raise it. And like most genuine practices, it begins not with a big decision, but with something considerably smaller and more concrete. It begins with the body, because the body is where the fire lives before it reaches anything else, before it reaches the thinking and the speaking and the decisions and the interactions. It reaches your nervous system. A nervous system in sustained alarm has a physical texture that becomes so familiar, it just becomes how things are. You start feeling this shallowness in your breathing, this constant bracing for the next thing, a constant low-level preparation for impact. Check yourself and look what happens to your shoulders as they, believe it or not, move closer to your ears. Your jaw gets tighter. These things don't go away unless you practice. It's not just an uncomfortable feeling, it's an input into how you get through the rest of your day. Decisions begin made from inside of that kind of tense body tend to be decisions that you maybe wouldn't have made otherwise. They tend to be faster than the situation requires, because the heat of the fire is adding urgency. Not because you're becoming careless, but because the physiological state of alarm has a logic all its own. And it's not the same logic that the situation calls for. So you have to practice returning to your own temperature. Begin with noticing the texture. The texture and the physical symptoms are arriving. When you notice that, you don't need meditation or an hour of breath work. You just need a pause. Long enough to let your shoulders drop, long enough to unclench your jaw, long enough to feel the ground beneath your feet, long enough to pause and say, wait, do I need to make this about my identity, or is this just something that is happening to me? That gap, as we've talked about over and over and over, is the practice. Not the silence, not the stillness, not some achieved state of equanimity. The gap, the returning. In the 30 seconds before you respond, in the moment before you walk back into a difficult conversation, in the space between one hard thing and the next, which, believe it or not, there is always space. Even if it feels like there isn't, if you pay attention, there always is. The second part of the application is by staying genuinely soft with the people who are not the fire. This sounds obvious, but it's almost universally failed. Not because people want to do it or they don't want to do it, but because of the nature of the depletion makes it structurally very difficult to not take it out on everyone else. Lack of a better phrase. The people who are the safest, the ones who have demonstrated they're staying, who have shown they can absorb difficulty, who are not part of your burning, they tend to receive the worst of what the fire has left behind. Notice if you're snapping. Notice if you're giving a version of yourself that didn't exist outside this fire. And this is not meant to make you feel guilty. Guilt is not useful here. That just adds more fire. It is meant to give you a genuine, clear-eyed recognition of the pattern. Right? The third part is the one Taoism considers the most foundational. And it's almost never included in any practical advice about navigating difficulty. And when I tell you this, you may just think to yourself, what in the world is Kit talking about? But stay with me, because most people won't tell you this. Do less than you believe that you need to do. Not as an avoidance, not as a surrender, not as giving up. That alarm system is already warning you against, but as the recognition that action in genuine alignment with the situation is what is required. And that action can only be achieved by doing a little bit less than you think you need to do, because what you think you need to do in the fire is panic. You need less force than you want to apply, because the fire is generating urgency. It is creating a persistent feeling that everything must be addressed right now, that the situation is deteriorating faster than you can keep up with it, and the only responsible response is to move faster and do more. Sometimes that's true, sure. Most of the time, it's not. Most of the time, that urgency is not an accurate reading of what the moment requires. That is your alarm system trying to mobilize and prevent complacency, but it pushes you too far. The alarm system is not concerned with being accurate. It's concerned with making you know that there is a threat. And so it treats everything as a threat, and it insists that everything needs your attention. And it produces a kind of an exhaustion of a person who has been trying to respond to one emergency after another, and cannot understand why they can't get on top of it. So what I would like to ask of you is, before each action, say to yourself, is this what the situation actually needs? Or is this the alarm telling me what to do? Sometimes those two things do point in the same direction. That's okay, but not usually. And in that gap between them, in the moments where the alarm says now and your genuine consideration says, maybe I can wait on this, that's where the practice lives. The rain does not hurry to put out the fire. It just falls when it falls. It goes where it goes. It doesn't match the fire's urgency because the rain does not have urgency. It has consistency. Do you understand? It has its own pace, its own nature. And it maintains both of those things even in the presence of something that is loudly insisting on a different pace. And it is precisely that, the maintenance of his own nature in the face of something trying to convert it, that makes it effective. The rain does not force, it is consistent. And it has a refusal to become something other than rain. You do not need to become a different person to survive the burning season. You need to remain more of yourself than the season is making it easy to do. That is the whole of the application. Small, daily, frequently failed, I'm not going to lie. Small daily practices, not heroic ones. But the difference over time between a person who comes out the other side of a hard season changed into something that the fire made, and a person who comes out the other side with just an experience, but still recognizably themselves. That difference is everything. Small practices, small attempts to stay in the gap. Now let's move on to our listener question for the day, which was the impetus for this, really for this episode. That and a couple of people that I've spoken to recently. And it comes to us from Dublin. I don't know if it's Dublin, Ireland or Dublin, Ohio. It just says Dublin. It says, Kid, I've been going through a horrible few months. My marriage ended and my mother has been seriously ill. And all of this more or less happened at the same time. I am exhausted by being told to be strong. Well, first of all, that is a brutal combination of loss and in a brutal sequence, because the fact that they came together rather than one at a time doesn't make each individual loss smaller. It makes both of them harder because there's no space between them to find your feet, right? I have to tell people this all the time, and it's hard to do because you hear it over and over, and we've talked about it over and over and over. Being strong is not the answer. Okay? It just isn't. Right? Back to the oak tree. The oak tree will break. What Taoism wants you to do is not to be strong, it's to be honest. Be honest about how heavy this is. Be honest about what you can and cannot carry right now. Be honest about the difference between the parts of this that are genuinely requiring your action and the parts that require nothing from you except the willingness to accept them. Fighting against these two situations, in many cases, is what will cost you the most. And this exhaustion that you're feeling, this is 100% physiologically real. Right? It is. This exhaustion, and part of it is the losses themselves, which is causing the exhaustion. But part of it, and the part that can actually be addressed is the effort of being a version of yourself that you just aren't right now. You don't owe anyone the performance of strength. Not right now. Be the rain, not the stone. Fall at your own pace. Stay at your own temperature. Let what needs to be soft be soft. That is not weakness. And this fire will not last forever, because fires never do. Even when they've been burning long enough that forever starts to feel like a reasonable description, they never do. Let this fire burn out. You don't owe anybody an explanation. And you absolutely do not need to, quote unquote, stay strong. Here's your Taoist assignment. In the next day or two, find 10 minutes. Not an hour, just 10 minutes to sit somewhere with a piece of paper. I don't want you to make a plan or problem solve or make a list. None of that. We'll kind of make a list. Because what I want you to do is write down what is actually on fire. Not the version that you're talking to people about. Not the version you're giving people when they say, how are you? Not the managed version, not the I'm coping version, not the designed reassurance version. What is actually happening? Write it down as plainly and directly as you can without judgment. Then write down what is not on fire. Things that are still intact, however small they may be. Relationships that are holding strong, the quality in yourself that hasn't changed, small thing that gives you joy, anything. Just write down what is not on fire. And then look at both lists. And I'm not asking you to look at both lists to reassure you that the second one makes the first one look smaller, because it doesn't. I'm not going to lie to you and pretend that will make any difference at all. But what I want you to do is to remember that a life on fire is not a life made of fire. There is always something the rain has already reached, something that has already cooled down, something that has not been touched by the fire in the first place. And that's not meant to be a comfort to you. It is meant to be data, information. Because this is where the practice of being the rain begins. Not from some imagined state of calm, but by recognizing, for whatever reason, that there are things that are not burning. And that is where you start. That is where you return to that part of yourself that is capable of withstanding the fire when you go back in it. There is a line in the Tao Te Ching in chapter 15 that describes the sage as being like ice on the verge of melting. Not frozen solid, not rigid, not stone, but not melted either. Not dissolved into the situation, not converted by the heat into something that is no longer themselves. Ice on the verge of melting. Present, real, genuinely itself. That is the most honest description of what Taoism is actually asking of a person in their own fire season. Not to be unmoved, not to achieve some elevated position where you float above it all, not to perform some kind of composure that certain well-meaning people have been telling you to perform, but to remain at your core yourself. Not the fire, but you. This is what be the rain means. The practice of returning when the heat has been working on you to your own temperature, of staying in whatever increment is available more yourself. Trusting that the thing that is most genuinely you, the root, your day, the deepest quality of who you are, is still there. If this episode found you at the right time, listen to it again. Send it to someone else who is in the middle of a burning season, not as advice, but just as company. And if something came up for you that you want to bring to the conversation, send it in. You fill out the form at dawananda.org, DAOANANDA.org or .com. You can also go to the Patreon page at patreon.com/TheModernTaoist. And if you're interested in private guidance, that is available to you now. Thanks to everyone that asked for that. It is available on the website. Again, DAOANANDA.org or .com. And until next time, thank you for being part of the community here at The Modern Taoist.
Thanks for listening to The Modern Taoist with Kit Man. Join the free Patreon community at patreon.com/TheModernTaoist and subscribe to the podcast for new episodes every Tuesday and weekend Taoism check-ins every Friday. Visit the website at dawananda.com and don't forget to like and follow us on whatever platform you find us.